Skye Kakoschke-Moore, welcome to the back cover. How are you?
Really well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, and I really appreciate you joining me today. As many people know, you are, of course, the CEO of Children and Young People with Disability Australia, also known as CYDA. So it's really an honour to speak with you, and I'm looking forward to our wide-ranging conversation today.
Likewise, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah. So look, we're just a couple of weeks out, or maybe 3 weeks out from the federal election. So there's quite a lot happening. Let's start with the broader picture around the education system. So CYDA's surveys highlight the ongoing exclusion, bullying, and higher university dropout rates faced by students with disabilities. Why do you think these issues are still so prevalent, and what actionable steps can be taken immediately to address them?
Yeah, such a great question to get us started because, when we talk about education, often it's really easy to forget how powerful education is. It's so powerful that it's recognised as a fundamental right for children and young people through the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Um, Many of the issues that come about in relation to exclusion, bullying, higher dropout rates can often be attributed to a couple of things. They can come down to things like attitudes towards disability and also low expectations about children and young people with disability. But we need to remember that more often than not, it's not intentional. So it's not like people are waking up every day and thinking, today I'm going to discriminate against a person with disability, because it's that unconscious bias that's leading to that discrimination. One of the key things that CYDA is doing as part of our election campaign is calling on whoever forms government next to implement something called a national roadmap for inclusive education. So a national roadmap for inclusive education was actually one of the key recommendations from the Disability Royal Commission.
Mm.
This was a commission, we need to remember, that was up and running for more than 5 years. It heard from thousands of people with disability about their experiences of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And often those experiences were happening in schools. CYDA's own surveys that we run have shown that 70% of students have reported being excluded from school. 65% of students with disability have reported experiencing bullying, and only 27% reported getting the support that they really needed in the classroom. So the reason that we're calling for a national roadmap, one, it was one of the key recommendations from the Disability Royal Commission, but two, we actually think it's a pathway to meaningful change. What we're asking for really from the government, from society, is a fundamental change in how we look at education, particularly for students with disabilities. So by having a national roadmap, that's sending a really clear message by the federal government that states and territories need to be doing more to ensure our school system is set up to support students with diverse learning needs. So when we're thinking about this national roadmap, the things we think it should include are like inclusion as part of core training for teachers, professional development for teachers to adapt the curriculum for diverse learners. We know that that's classrooms in 2025 and will be for many, many years to come. So we need to make sure that our teachers are really set up for success from the start and are supported for success throughout their teaching career. The other thing we'd love to see a national roadmap do is support better data collection and tracking. We often find ourselves in a little bit of a black hole when it comes to data about students with disability because it's not consistently captured and reported anywhere. So we don't actually know if we're getting better, if the things that we're doing are making a difference. So better data collection will help with that. The other thing that a national roadmap could do is look at setting out some clear rules for reasonable adjustments in schools so that students, teachers, and parents know sort of what they can expect when they're in the classroom and what kind of help is available.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've just mentioned, specific details about what that roadmap would look like. Just out of curiosity, have you seen any specific policies as yet from either party with regards to, people with disabilities? Have you seen any policies that, could help support this community?
Yeah, it's a great question. The National Roadmap was a recommendation from the Disability Royal Commission, and the federal, state, and territory governments all issued their own response to that report by the Commission, including all of the recommendations. Each jurisdiction said that in principle they agreed to a national roadmap. So they have set themselves up for, I suppose, an expectation that one will be delivered in the future. To date, we haven't seen any clear commitments though. So this is something that we'll be keeping a really close eye on, and that as part of our election advocacy, we'll be pushing candidates for.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope that, this community is not left out of the conversation, because it often happens, and all Australians should be included, as you alluded to earlier. So let's hope for the best. Of course, education is just one part of the puzzle. We know that young people with disabilities are often or also disproportionately impacted by the rising cost of living. Young people with disabilities face a disproportionate economic burden, higher living costs, and inadequate income support. How do you propose the government address these gaps, especially in the context of the ongoing cost of living crisis?
The cost of living crisis is real. Like, you can talk to any person, any family, but particularly for young people with disability and for families with children with disability, we know that cost of living is a real barrier to them being able to fully participate in everyday activities. And there are some tangible things that the incoming government, whatever that government may be, can do. So at CYDA, we'd love to see an increase in income support to young people with disability, families and caregivers, by raising the job seeker and youth, the job seeker payment and the youth allowance payment rates. And also introducing supplements to the disability support pension and carer payments, so that they're able to provide equal support for disability and illness. And we also want the government to make sure the disability support pension and carer payments are accessible and available to those who need it, and that they're not impacted by relationship status. This is something that's a real concern, because if you have someone whose payment rates are tied to a partner, this can place them in very uncertain sort of footing, or in really risky situations sometimes, particularly where that situation may not be safe for them to be in. So we actually think that there's quite an imperative on the government to act on this. Those are some of the practical steps the government can take, but there's also work that we need to do to make sure employers are coming to the table as well. Like, as we know, young people with disability face higher unemployment rates than their non-disabled peers. And so young people with disability who are job seekers or who are in work really need employers who understand what disability inclusion looks like, and like how that can sort of become a reality in a workplace. And that starts with things like how roles are designed, how they're advertised, the recruitment process that's used, the induction process once somebody starts, and then the business as usual processes once that young person is in the door. There's already some really great work happening in this space that's being funded by the federal department, by a federal government department. So CYDA is partnering with an organisation called Social Ventures Australia on a project that's supporting employers in Melbourne to hire young people with disability who don't have any post-school qualifications. Like, we know that for that cohort, it's incredibly hard to get a job. And so the employers that we're working with range from those in the private sector, local government, and all of them have made a commitment to hire at least one young person with disability after completing this program. And in the really promising news, we've already had 3 employers report that they have employed a young person with disability.
Wow.
And this project is all about upskilling employers so that they understand what disability access and inclusion looks like in reality, and that they can learn from one another and create that safe space for some of those questions that might feel a bit uncomfortable to be asked, like having a space for those questions to be asked and answered. Like, as I said earlier, it's not like people are waking up every day and thinking, I'm going to discriminate against somebody today. Often it's that sort of unconscious bias or the lack of know-how that might be getting in the way, or even the fear of getting it wrong. Like, we hear that a lot from employers, that quite often they're scared that they're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, and that can actually lead to inaction. So we're really heartened to see that there are employers out there who have said, you know what, we're going to be brave and we're going to push ourselves because we recognise that young people with disability have a contribution to make, and they're going to reap the benefits of that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. The lack of understanding, I think, or the lack of education. I think that's a really important point to make. You did just mention equity and access. What can be done to build a disability support system that isn't just accessible, but truly equitable? And are there specific changes to the existing disability support ecosystem that would make a tangible difference for young people with disabilities?
Yeah. So we know that at the moment, the disability ecosystem just isn't working. So research has shown that more than 4 in 5 children with disability don't get the supports they need. And when we think that there's more than 500,000 young people with disability in Australia today, I think we'd struggle to find many that say that, yep, they've got the support they need to get through life and they're feeling really well supported. And this can be due to a range of factors. So it could be from not knowing where to get help from, encountering ableist attitudes from providers or those that are supposed to help, managing big transitions like going through school, finishing school, moving into employment, moving out of home for the first time, entering relationships for the first time. So at the moment, young people with disability almost have a bit of a choose your own adventure landscape, but there's not really a map to help them get to the outcome that they want. It's not clear, is that something that the NDIS should help with? Is this something that they should just expect from their employer or from their school? So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that this ecosystem that we have is a lot more joined up. And so families of children can feel confident that, like, no matter where they go, they'll be able to be pointed in the right direction, even if it is that initial sort of wrong door approach, that they're actually going to get help from the person that they're talking to. And for young people, we hear from them that they really want to have access to resources and opportunities that will help build their own knowledge about their rights, about how to exercise their rights, and where to go if something goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you about advocacy because advocacy and individual support are critical, but they're often underfunded. What steps should both government and the private sector take to ensure young people with disabilities receive the advocacy that they need, particularly when it comes to securing essential services?
Yeah. So there's so many changes happening right now, like in the world, but when we look at Australia in particular, there's a lot of reform happening in the education space. So whether that's changes to the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, foundational supports, which are supposed to be rolling out at some point this year, which are supposed to be services and supports that families and young people with disability who may not be eligible for the NDIS can still access the support they need, right through to changes that are being sort of entertained around the Disability Discrimination Act. So there's a lot happening. And what this means is that for children and young people with disability in particular, they're going to be disproportionately impacted. So at CYDA, we're calling on state and federal governments to invest meaningfully in individual advocacy services with a particular focus on ensuring that children and young people with disability can get support they need. So like individual advocacy, when we talk about that, these are services that can step in if somebody's hurt, they've been excluded, they've been treated unfairly, or they've been discriminated against. But we know that from talking to our colleagues in the sector, existing services have huge wait times, and some are even needing to turn away new clients. So this puts people experiencing vulnerability into even riskier situations, and really just reinforces the need for more investment by governments in this space. But along with individual advocacy, we've also seen that funding for groups, often called peer networks or peer support groups, have been really effective in the past at helping children, young people and families to build their self-advocacy skills. So self-advocacy is all about understanding your rights and how to stand up for them, essentially. At CYDA, we were previously funded to run something called the Young Leaders Program, which was all about supporting young people with disability to understand their rights and to understand systems change and how how to make a difference. And one of the graduates from that program told us last year that they were able to use the self-advocacy skills and the confidence they gained from that program to advocate for changes to the way that TAFE in their state handles the admission process so that it was more accessible for prospective students with disability in the future. We think that's an excellent example of government investment resulting in systemic reforms that will make systems and processes much more accessible and inclusive to everyone. But really, at the end of the day, there's only so much self-advocacy and individual advocacy you can do in systems that are ableist and that don't take a strengths-based approach to understanding disability. So anyone who provides a service, whether it's the National Disability Insurance Agency, a school, your GP, a government service, or even your local coffee shop, must ensure that they understand disability rights and that they're offering a service and supports that are accessible and inclusive for all people with disability.
Yeah, that's right. And finally, you just mentioned the NDIS, which leads me to my final question. The NDIS has been a lifeline for many, but also a source of frustration and concern, especially with recent reports of fraud and dodgy providers. With recent government crackdowns on NDIS fraud and growing concerns around dodgy providers, what do you believe needs to change within the NDIS system to ensure that young people with disabilities can access the support they need without fear of exploitation or disruption?
This is such an important question because when we talk about fraud's unacceptable in any context. And when we're talking about fraud in the context of the NDIA, it's important, but it can also feel vexed because that narrative often takes the focus away from the life-changing supports that the National Disability Insurance Scheme can and does provide. Like, you don't need to look far for headlines that scream the words NDIS together with burden and scam. And for people who are removed from the disability community, this may be the only commentary they hear about the NDIS. But this is the same NDIS that funds supports that mean a young person with disability is able to build their skills, get help with daily tasks that many of us take for granted, and participate in the community with their friends and family. So young people with disability really deserve to be able to trust that the services and supports they're getting will show up on time, that these supports are going to uphold their rights, and that they're not going to be overcharged. We talk about like the wedding tax being rolled out as soon as somebody mentions that they're hiring a service for a wedding. The same kind of thing happens in the NDIS space, where as soon as you mention that you're an NDIS participant, people are seeing that the prices increase. So this is a real issue. So what we really need to see is a situation where young people with disability, as I say, can trust that the supports that they're going to get are going to be high quality. They're going to deliver what they say they will. And they also need to know who has the power to take action if something goes wrong. And they need to feel confident that if something goes wrong, action will be taken. Last year, we saw what can happen when action isn't taken. It came to light that the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, which is essentially like the watchdog for the NDIS, they failed to take action when it became aware that a provider was illegally restraining children in the name of therapy. This caused shockwaves throughout the disability community because you could see that government funding was being used in a way that was resulting in unauthorised restrictive practices and of serious harm being perpetrated on children. The regulator was aware, but nothing was done. But since that time, it's really promising to see that the Commission has been much more proactive about responding to complaints and publicly talking about when it uses its powers. So the powers that it has are things like, banning orders, so that any provider who is found to have breached their duties isn't able to continue to provide services to others. This is something that will help build confidence in the disability support ecosystem. So as I say, it's really important that children and young people with disability understand what their rights are and that they know what a good service looks like, and that they know what to do when they feel like something is going wrong or something is wrong. So this includes ensuring that they can be confident that if they raise a concern, they're not going to be denied a service, and that any of the complaint mechanisms that they're using, whether that's with the provider or with the Quality and Safeguards Commission, that process is going to be accessible, is going to be really person-centred, and that timely action will be taken as a result.
Mm, absolutely. Well, obviously, a lot of change is needed. And fortunately, with organisations like CYDA, we inch closer to that change. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. And thank you again for your time today, Skye.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, see you.